Hello, everyone, and welcome to the ITS Georgia June chapter meeting. We are here to talk about ITS and trucking, and it is going to be a good program for us all today. We know that. A couple of housekeeping items for you. You will need to register to get your PDH certificate. Look in the chat section of the YouTube screen and you'll find a link there. And also, if you have questions that arise during the meeting, please enter those in the chat. We'll get those to the moderator and get those to our experts today. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chapter President Winter Horrible. Winter.
Hello, ITS Georgia members and guests. We are on our third month of hosting our monthly meetings virtually. We have technically, the state, at least, has been open for 2 months, and we are well into summer break, and if you can believe it, over halfway through 2020. With all that, I hope all of you have managed to remain safe during this time. As for ITS Georgia, we are continuing to push forward during these times and continue to work together to make decisions regarding our future meetings. Just as a few announcements, one is that there is still a need for laptops by students in our local communities. We have teamed up with the Boys and Girls Club and are being updated with the technology needs in these communities. We are still taking donations, and with one click, you can help a child in our community to have the same technology advantage as so many of our children already that they already have. Our Peachtree Curiosity Lab meeting and tour that was initially scheduled in March and rescheduled for next month is actually in the process of being rescheduled again due to still some current restrictions and guidelines that prevent us from having the best tour we can possibly have. But with that, we've had a few local governments who have stepped up to the plate to take on our July 29th meeting and discuss maintaining signal and ITS infrastructure. This will be a joint meeting with our friends at GPA, the Georgia Planning Association, so be on the lookout for registration details to come. At this time, we are still trying to move forward with an in-person meeting in August, and we are working with the venue, City Springs, to make sure that we understand how they are conducting events to adhere to the current guidelines. So also keep your eyes open for that. We could go virtually, just keep that in mind. We understand that, day to day, things are changing. Also, the annual meeting discussion is in full force with the board and the annual meeting committee as we are maneuvering through these uncertain times. We are currently under contract for the end of September with the Westin located in beautiful Jekyll Island, Georgia. We have sent out a survey that many of you, thank you for responding to, but I would like to extend the opportunity to all of you to reach out to me over the next week if you would like to provide any insight to your thoughts about the annual meeting, so I can be sure to keep the board informed of how the members in our organization are moving through these current times. I want to thank all of you for tuning in to our June meeting to hear about ITS and the trucking industry. I also want to give a shout out to our presenters and moderator, Rebecca Brewster, Sam Harris, and Daniel Studdard, who have also worked with us to present in this virtual format. And I cannot give enough thanks to show my appreciation for our ITS Georgia member organization who has come on to sponsor us, and that is Control Technologies. And, just can't give Tommy Anderson and his staff and Control Technologies enough thank yous for allowing us to continue with these meetings. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tommy so we can hear a little bit more about him and his company.
Okay, Winter, can you hear me now? All right. Well, thank you, Bill and Winter. I just want to thank you and ITS Georgia and everyone involved with getting these monthly meetings together. It takes a lot of hard work and time to make all this work and come together, and you guys really do a fantastic job of that. So I just want to say kudos to you guys for pulling all this together, well, it's good to see many of you. This has become kind of the new normal for me. I don't know, as well as probably for a lot of you as well, whether it is a Zoom, a Teams, or Skype video conference. We're all working in a new landscape. I see many new challenges and hurdles for us all moving forward. COVID-19 has affected our everyday lives with social distancing and shelter in place. This has affected traffic, tax revenue, and public safety, which affects all of us in this industry pretty much directly. So, but through these challenges, we have the opportunity to be innovative and add value to sustainable development. So I believe Control Technologies and ITS Georgia are up to the challenges ahead. So if you guys would like to find some more information about Control Technologies, we have a brand new website that we've updated. It's letter ct-grp.com. Like I said, it's ct-grp.com, and that's our new website. So if you would like to come look at some of the new innovative things we're doing at Control Technologies, please visit our new website. So again, I'd like to thank ITS Georgia again, and I'd like to introduce our moderator. Our moderator is Daniel Studdard. He is the Principal Planner and Transportation Access and Mobility Division with the Atlanta Regional Commission. And Daniel will be our moderator, and he will present our speakers for the event today. And once again, thanks everybody for the event. Thanks, Winter.
Thank you, Tommy. And of course, thank you for being a sponsor today. As Bill mentioned earlier, I want to encourage everybody that's attending to ask your questions via YouTube in the chat box there. We definitely want to hear from you. This is, of course, still a fairly new format for us, but I think we're all getting used to trying to be interactive on meetings like this, even if they're online. We definitely want to hear from you, so don't hesitate till the end. When you have a question in mind, go ahead and type it in, and we will get that to our speakers as they wrap up their presentations. So in a few minutes, we're going to be hearing from Rebecca Brewster from ATRI, but we're going to kick things off here today with Sam Harris. He is the State Safety Engineering Manager with the Georgia DOT, and he's going to give a presentation on the GDOT Safety Engineering Program. And so with that, Sam, go ahead and feel free to share your screen and give your presentation. It's all yours.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for the invite. It is good to be back at an ITS meeting. It's been a little bit of time, but I'm happy to be back and to talk a little bit about the GDOT Safety Engineering Program. So let's see. Today, the takeaways are going to be, one sec. All right, there's 3 takeaways from today's presentation. So what is the GDOT Safety Engineering Program? Some of you may know what it is. It's its own separate program. Some of you may think that safety projects purely come out of the planning department, but no, there is a separate safety program. And then what do the crashes look like during COVID-19? I want to dive a little bit into that, and finally wrap up with New Metric, which is the new safety analytical software that the safety program adopted the tail end of last year, which is free to everybody. So if anybody likes what they see today, they can reach out to me and we can get them a login. So Highway Safety Improvement Program, AICP. This is the funding that supports the safety program at GDOT. This is federal funds that come in. There's strict criteria to be able to produce viable safety projects for the state, and it's data driven. And you're going to hear me say data driven a lot. And if you know me from our top days, you know that that's all about me, is using data to be able to solve challenges. So what are the goals of the program? Eliminate fatalities. We are a Vision Zero state. We ultimately want to have the goal of eliminating all fatalities on our roadways, but also reduce the number of serious injury crashes on all Georgia roadways as well, which highlights all Georgia roadways and not just state routes. Is why one of the reasons why I love the position that I'm in, is because I get to work with local agencies, and it's not just particular to the state route system. It's looking at county roads, local roads as well, by using a safety-driven approach. So using analytics to find out where the safety issues are and be able to correct them as long as they're a viable safety project with a good safety BC. Objectives of the program. Reducing not only vehicle crashes and serious injury crashes, but pedestrian and bicycle as well, and other modes. Scooters you can throw in there, but more importantly, pedestrian, especially with the uptick of pedestrian crashes over the past few years, is particularly important for the program. Reducing roadway and lane departure crashes. This is also very important because over a quarter of the fatalities nationwide are in this category alone. So people going off the roadway and striking the object, or going over a center lane line and striking another car. This is particularly important for GDOT as well. Our data shows that it is up there in the same realm in terms of the numbers, but we're doing everything we can to put in projects like rumble strips, cable barriers, and I think for this fiscal year, it's about to end. I spent a little over $60 million in that category alone this year. Reducing intersection crashes. Over 30% of the crashes in the state occur at an intersection. Reducing off-system crashes. Again, taking you back up to all Georgia roadways. I spend probably close to $10 million a year on off-system projects. Reducing crashes on high-risk rural roads, and then more importantly, aligning goals with stakeholders and partners. So how does a project get put together? This is a general look at how a project gets put together. There's many different ways that we work through it, but I'm going to walk you through generally what happens. You ID a safety concern. This safety concern comes from the data-driven process, but it also can come from our stakeholders, such as GDOT management, politicians, district staff that we work closely together with, or citizens. And then the second step in the process, once we've ID'd a safety concern, and probably one of the more important steps, is we need to vet it. We need to determine, is this a viable safety project? So we developed a template to crash screening. It's about 2 pages long, 2 to 3 pages, very concise, and really it just tells us, is this a good safety project, and move forward. If we say yes, we go to an intersection control evaluation, come up with a preferred alternative, then go into a traffic engineering study, which then it gets a lot more intensive with details of the crash trends, justifications, operational analysis, risk factors, all that good stuff. Usually it goes in the concept. At this point, it goes to our office program delivery. Once concept's approved, goes into design, letting, construction, and ultimately, and probably one of the most important things as well, is evaluating and improving upon. A lot of the CMS, CRF factors that we use are national. So any project that has currently been done by the program, or it's also being evaluated to determine how is the project working in Georgia, on Georgia's roadways, on particular terrains within Georgia, and that's important to us. So if there's something that's not working to what we thought was the full benefit, we note that and we correct it for future use. Another small part about the program is something I really enjoy is Safe Routes to School. I have outreach coordinators across the state. We have 500 plus partner schools. They do a lot of outreach in the classrooms. We do bicycle rodeos where helmets are given away and teaching kids how to put on helmets correctly. And ultimately, with the goal of getting kids and teaching them how to walk safely to school or bike safely to school. RSAs is another big part of the program. It's 14 per year that we do, 2 per district. We have a whole new guideline that was just put out, and guess what? It's more data driven, a lot more data intensive on the front end to ensure that we're selecting RSAs that are going to produce good, viable safety projects. And that's very important to us. So ITS and safety. Let me try to bridge the gap a little for the conversation that we're having today. There are many aspects of ITS and how it interjects into safety, and the safety program, especially with me heading it up. I'm reaching out to different sectors. Either it would be with Matt with the ITS section, Matt or Mark with the signal section with Kate and Alan. Really understanding, okay, what can we do to use technology to its fullest benefit and allow us to make our roads safer. So what I'm showing you on the screen now is a top secret document. So no one take any pictures of it or anything like that. But you may have seen a video on YouTube where a rail car actually goes through a roundabout, believe it or not. And the railroad just goes straight through a roundabout. And then the technology that go along with that, similar to the technology you see at a signalized intersection or non-signalized intersection. But as soon as I saw that, I said, I need to up the ante. I need to find a location that has 2 railroads going through the center of an intersection so I can put a roundabout in it. And I found that location. And this is right now, this is in TE study phase, about to go to concept. As soon as we successfully deliver this one, I'll be looking for 3. So we'll keep an eye out for that. But other aspects, you probably haven't heard enough about that thing, connected vehicles, autonomous vehicles, that's out there. At its core, of course, that's a safety enhancement. That's what FHWA for the past decade, maybe more, has been preaching about. The ITS group at GDOT using the AID cameras, that's safety. And that's why we're going to continue to collaborate with that group. Other things such as like research, we developed within the safety program with Georgia Tech. We actually have a unit that actually has cameras on it, and we actually deploy it to locations that actually, and our intent to begin with was to get pedestrian counts. However, with Georgia Tech being a great university, they pushed the envelope, and we now have the capability to, within the video, to do tracing analytics and get exposure rates for pedestrians. So that also was really cool. And actually, me and Tommy had a great conversation the other day about this, but passive ped detection. Again, technology and safety being used together. So I'm going to jump into takeaway point number 2, and that's the COVID-19 impacts to traffic safety. So what was the impact? So right around March 16th, I believe, is when GDOT started teleworking, and many other companies may have started teleworking around the same time. About a week later, you started seeing schools start to close down, sending kids home to learn at home. But around April 2nd, or on April 2nd, Governor Kemp issued the statewide shelter in place. And towards the end of the month, you started seeing some businesses start to open back up in late April, with being dine-in or theaters and stuff in that nature. So when we took a look at the data, we wanted to take a look, number one, compare it 2019 to 2020 to get a gauge on the differences. But we also wanted to get a good understanding in the particular months that we chose. You know, March was interesting to us because you kind of had that mixture. People were kind of teleworking, not teleworking. In April, people should have been teleworking, or there shouldn't be that many people on the road because of the shelter in place. So in reflection to the numbers, this table is showing you is the total amount of crashes and broken down by severity type. So using the CAPCO scale with K being fatal, and then going all the way down to O's, which is a non-injury, it's a PDO, property damage only. In the month of March, we actually saw a decrease of crashes from 17%, which is substantial. And I want to highlight this as well, that you don't necessarily, just because GDOT in Georgia has seen these decreases, not other states have seen them. I've spoken with people in my same position in other states. They've seen increases in fatalities. They've seen increases in their crashes. And it really relates back to speed. And it was something I was very concerned about when the pandemic started to occur, and quickly got on the phone with Matt and Alan and really had great conversations. And those groups did an outstanding job, you know, with their messaging, changing signal plans to be able to adapt to the new demands that are out on the roadway. But in April, we actually saw a 59% decrease in crashes, which is pretty substantial, I might add. Again, that's correlated with volume. We expected to see a drop or hoped to see a drop, but 59% is quite a large number. And the number down there, cost reduction of $66 million a day. Really all we did here is take the differences between the crashes that we could assume would have been there based on trends from last year, and then be able to add a monetary benefit number that is standard within, you know, for instance, a fatality has a benefit number of around $10.5 million. And so that's how we came up with that number, but you can see how substantial it is. So pedestrian crashes. Anecdotally, we've seen increases in pedestrian activity and increases in bicycle activity. These are the numbers that we were really concerned about. These are the numbers that we wanted to start drilling into to make sure that pedestrians are safer and are staying safe, and that bicyclists are staying safe, and or any other modes as well. I am thankful to see, you know, overall for the state, there was an 8% decrease in March. There was a 52% decrease in April, and I was very happy to see that. But I will say we've narrowed down in a couple sections, and the trends changed in larger populated areas. But overall, the pedestrian numbers do look good. Now, for bicycle crashes, this is an even smaller subset of the crash database, as you can see with the lower numbers here. But essentially, with these, we saw actually a 6% increase in March. March. And in April, we did see a 17% decrease. However, fatalities increased in that month, and that definitely is concerning. And I've seen the May data as well, and fatalities continue to increase in May. So I can stress anyone that's listening in, be aware of your surroundings when you're driving on the roadway. Share the road for all users, and please abide by the 3-foot passing law. And to tie in with the major theme of trucking, I added in commercial motor vehicles and also looked at that. 10% decrease in March and a 43% decrease in April. I'd love to hear, and maybe, you know, offline Rebecca can tell me, but, you know, was there a decrease in the amount of trucking that was going on? was there a drop off there? Because it would be interesting if they continued at their full capacity or near their full capacity and there still was a 43% decrease in crashes, that there's something to be said there. So new metric. This is a nifty tool, and I'll bring it up here, and everyone should be able to see it. This tool, just to start off with, was adopted again in late 2019. A lot of effort went into this tool, especially with Dave Adams' team. So they did an outstanding job with this. So if you're used to using gears, this is completely different. You used to go into gears, take out the Excel sheet, start going through the data yourself and trying to understand what the trends are. Really no more of that. This tool will find what you're looking for, and it can correlate different data sets inside of it, and it's very impressive. So what we're looking at here is a heat map of the entire state. This is looking at data from 13 to 2018. 19 data will be ported in this year. But you can see on the left-hand side, there's a good representation of that heat map. You can see over here, there's a summary, so you can look at total crashes, a breakdown of certain type of crashes that are important right off the bat that you would want to be able to see. You can see severity broken down, time of day, so you can really get a good look. So let's see, total crashes, when do you not want to drive? Between 4 to 6 p.m., 17% of the crashes for the entire state for that whole entire period are happening behind that. And guess what? Correlated with the peak hour. So that makes sense in that regard. Breaking down manner of collision, which type of crash are you most likely going to get into? Well, with almost 40% of the crashes in the state being rear end, you're most likely or have a better probability of getting into a crash that's going to be a rear end. So with that, I'm just going to show off a little bit, and let's see here. These are all clickable, so I can click on CMV, and I'm going to try and keep to the trend of the trucking for the presentation. So I click in CMV, the map updates, the heat map updates, the summary tables will update on its side. Now you're really seeing it highlighted, especially in the Atlanta area, and it's really outlining some of the interstate system, which makes sense. We're looking at commercial road vehicles. And so if we actually want to deep dive into a little bit more, you can go into the filter. You can actually type in, let's take a look at District 5. So what it'll do is it'll recalculate and come in and zone in to District 5. And you can do this with counties, city boundaries. I mean, again, you have a lot of options available here. So we're still looking at the heat map. What I really like looking at is actually dots of individual crashes. So this map will then update and show the dots for the individual crashes. They're all color coded. Blue is going to be a PDO, so property damage only. That's the least severe of an injury, with the red being a fatal, which is the most severe of an injury. So at this point, you would just keep adding in different metrics to be able to take a look at them, to be able to have a better understanding of what type of trends are we looking at, where are the locations that we need to be looking at. And again, right now we're looking at CMV related, GDOT District 5. Maybe we only want to look at suspected serious injuries. Click on that. It'll update this section as well, and then be able to start breaking this down. So you can see in 2015 was the highest amount with 21%, breaking down the time, 6 to 8 a.m. Close to 15% of the serious injury crashes in District 5 that are CMV related are happening between 6 and 8, most of them being rear end, angle being the second highest. But there's other metrics that you can add into here. It's really whatever's on the police report, and as I'm scrolling through, you can really see a lot of the difference. I'm going to be fun with this. I'm going to click in vehicle color, look at, let's see here, traffic control would be interesting. And then ownership is another one. And then functional class is also another one. So let's go pull that one in real fast and be able to apply those. So when I apply those, then I'm able to update this sheet over here. So guess what? Vehicle color is always, and I was talking with someone the other day, and this one was pretty interesting, but vehicle color, for whatever reason, and I get it with commercial motor vehicles, and, a good portion of them are white, but looking at regular vehicles too, I saw a trend that white vehicles are the ones that most often get in crashes. So if your insurance company is giving you a hard time about red, I mean, they're not too terribly off, but white is the one. So you can go call your insurance and get your premium changed on that one, if you can make that argument. But yeah, traffic control, you can see, no control present, or stop sign, traffic, or at a traffic signal. Ownership, almost 82% of the CMV crashes in District 5 that are suspected serious injury are occurring on state route. So that's a trend that pops up, and we can take off with that. So it's really important to be able to look at that. Another really fun thing about this is you can actually click on a dot. It'll bring it up on the side over here, give you a Google layout, look at the crash location, be able to give you the incident number where you can pull the report, give you a lot more detailed information about the crash, and also give you the narrative of the crash as well. And we're also going to be including the picture that the officer draws in this as well. Almost finished here. I wanted to show off one little other piece of this. This is what we call the network screening. Right now it's looking at roadway segments. This is going to be developed on an intersection ranking as well. So right now it's just on segments. So when you're looking at this, and it's called the sliding window, what we can actually do here is change the length and what the program actually looks at. So I'm looking at a mile segment. It's ranking everything. This is all crashes in the state, but let's get back to our trend about trucking. Go CMV related, go to true, and it's looking at all the data from 13 all the way to 18, and it's looking at segments of roadway and determining what that looks like on a crash rate. I can also rank this on the EPDO, which is an equivalent property damage, which ties it to the monetary benefit value. So when I click that, it'll update the map over here and actually show a different picture. Yes, the crash rates are showing one thing, but the EPDO value shows another thing, and you can quickly go into and zoom into the route of what that is and be able to click on it to be able to show, okay, well, what exactly is going on with that particular location? And once you open up that safety analysis and actually take a look at it, it shoots you to a screen that looks very similar to this. And what it's showing you is the different type of benefits associated with it and the different types of countermeasures that could be associated with it as well. So that's Numetric in a nutshell. There's a lot more in detail to go. If anybody has questions, of course, they can ask them. But that concludes the presentation. But the main takeaways is you should have a better understanding of what the GDOT safety engineering program is, a little bit of knowledge about what COVID and the crashes associated with that, and now you know what Numetric is and the powerful nature of it. So with that, I will stop my share, and thank you for the time.
Thank you for that, Sam. I definitely appreciate seeing the Numetric tool, the walkthrough of that. I think one of my first transportation projects out of grad school, a coworker and I had to go through about 2,000 records of paper crashes for a safety study. And so going from that to Gears and now this next generation is a huge improvement as someone who has done this in the past. And so very happy to see that and that next step forward. As a reminder to everybody watching, don't forget to enter your questions in the chat box there. We definitely want to hear from you for Sam's presentation as well as for our next presentation. Up next, we have Rebecca Brewster. She is the President and Chief Operating Officer for ATRI. For those who aren't familiar with ATRI, my main work at ARC is related to freight planning, and we definitely have worked with ATRI off and on a number of times over the years. I've worked with Rebecca and a number of her staff. We're fortunate, they're a national organization with about 4 offices nationally, but we're fortunate to have one of their offices right here in Metro Atlanta in Cobb County. So they are local and are certainly knowledgeable about Metro Atlanta because it certainly is a major trucking hub at the national level. So we're fortunate to have Rebecca here to give a presentation talking about ATRI, about COVID-19 impacts and the trucking industry overall. So with that, Rebecca, feel free to share your screen and take it away.
Thank you, Daniel. Note to self, I need to remember to unmute first and then share my screen. But I certainly appreciate the invitation to be here today and talk a little bit about what's been going on in the trucking industry. And as we are, as my slide says, trucking toward a new reality. So just a little background on ATRI. For those who are not familiar with us, we are the trucking industry's not-for-profit research organization. And most of the work we do is centered in these areas here. One of the hallmarks of ATRI is that we provide all of our research free of charge. And so I've listed our website address here, truckingresearch.org. So I would encourage you, if you want to find more out about the work we've done on behalf of the trucking industry, to visit us on our website there. You can download any of our studies for free. We are governed by a board of directors that is made up of the CEOs of the organizations you see here, a number of recognizable names, of course. But where the real heavy lifting at ATRI gets done is this body, our Research Advisory Committee. And this group is annually charged with figuring out what are the trucking industry's top research needs. And what I am particularly proud about this group is the diversity of it. It not only represents trucking fleets and trucking industry suppliers, but we have truck driver groups. So we have both the Teamsters and the independent driver group, OIDA, represented here. We have law enforcement, government, academia. So it really is a very diverse group of trucking industry stakeholders who figure out what work needs to be done in the trucking industry in terms of research needs and knowledge gaps. Obviously, we were presented with a very unique situation this year with COVID-19, and our Research Advisory Committee quickly pivoted and said, you know, ATRI needs to be focused on how is this pandemic impacting our industry. And so in cooperation with the Owner Operator Independent Driver Association, their foundation, we launched a survey. And I have to tell you, I was really one of the naysayers on our staff. I thought with everything that folks were dealing with in March and April with COVID-19, I thought people are not going to take the time in the trucking industry to respond to a survey about COVID-19. But in fact, fortunately, I was proven wrong. In just over 2 weeks, we had over 5,000 responses to that survey. The majority of those were for professional drivers. They represented generally smaller fleets, 50 or fewer trucks, and they were predominantly from the truckload industry of our sector of our industry. One of the first questions we asked was, are you seeing changes in your average length of haul? So how many miles is your average trip in each day or each week? And you can see that we had a drop in those long haul trips, 1,000 miles or more, those over the road segments, where you see a lot of the traffic coming out of the ports ultimately are those longer over the road trips. We saw a decrease in that, which you would expect with decreased activity at the ports. But those local trips of less than 100 miles per trip, we saw more than a doubling of that among our respondents, generally attributable to those trips that we saw an increase in running from grocery store distribution centers to the grocery stores, as everybody was needing toilet paper and everything else that we were stocking up on during the pandemic. ATRI has a truck GPS data set that we utilize for a number of analyses. You're probably familiar with our annual list of the top truck bottlenecks in the country that we use that GPS data set for. It's over 1 million commercial trucks, almost exclusively class 7 and 8 trucks. And that data comes up into us in real time. And so we wanted to see how traffic was impacted or truck speeds were impacted as a virtue of traffic at some of those top truck bottlenecks. So for instance, on the one on the left is Spaghetti Junction. And here we compared average truck speeds for the same third week in March from 2018, 2019, and 2020. And you can see that the afternoon rush hour is particularly egregious at Spaghetti Junction. Truck speeds average typically 14 to 15 miles per hour in the afternoon rush hour. Third week in March of 2020, we saw truck speeds averaging 55 miles per hour, which is, of course, what it's posted at there. So a significant increase. We saw similar increases in the morning rush hour as well, although not quite as dramatic because that time period is not quite as bad. What I think is interesting is the location on the right in the greater New York City area and Queens on a section of I-495. As we all know, New York was one of the hardest hit areas, one of the first to go into shutdown, and yet we still saw in the third week of March, although truck speeds were improved because there was less traffic on the roadway, we still had, in the morning rush hour at that location, truck speeds down in the 20 to 30 mile per hour range, even though that too is posted at 55 miles per hour. So not a great improvement, at least in that third week in March. These GPS analyses mirror what we found in our survey with the OIDA, that 87% of the respondents said traffic congestion was reduced during the COVID pandemic. So it was a great example for us in the trucking industry of how much more efficiently the supply chain can operate when the infrastructure is really ours at the time to deal with, because there were very few cars on the road. But we did see some disparate impacts on freight across the industry. Now, this looks at changes to freight levels based on what sector of the industry you operate in. And where you really saw the hit, that gray bar on the left side among specialized fleets, is primarily those who operate tank trucks. And as everybody was staying at home, there was less demand for fuel and therefore less business for those operating and servicing gas stations. And so you see a much more dramatic impact over there. Whereas on the other side of the continuum, you see in the truckload sector and other sectors, primarily pickup and delivery fleets, increased freight levels during the pandemic. Those impacts were also felt disparately based on the size of fleet. And so on the left side, you saw smaller fleets were feeling the pain of the pandemic much more so than larger fleets. And a lot of that is because in many instances, those smaller fleets and owner operators, in a lot of cases, service just one sector of the industry. For instance, we had a call early on from a truck fleet of just a few trucks that operates exclusively to service theaters. They move sets around for theatrical productions. And if that's your business and that part of the economy just shuts down completely, they were trying to pivot into grocery delivery and general freight delivery. And it's not always an easy thing to do if you don't have an established customer base. So it really was an interesting lesson for everybody in how quickly these things can change based on business activity. One of the big issues in the trucking industry, of course, is truck parking. I know Daniel and ARC have done a lot of work on this as well. So we ask in our survey, is truck parking harder during this pandemic or easier to find? And you can see that about 44% said truck parking was harder or much harder to come by. Now, we attribute that in part to a number of state departments of transportation, when the pandemic started, actually closed public rest areas because they did not want to send people out to clean them. And so they just shuttered those facilities. Well, trucks were still operating. Truck drivers still needed access to those facilities. So they essentially just cut out part of the capacity for drivers to park at a time when drivers needed it. Initially, some states' response to the trucking industry's call to reopen those facilities was to just put some porta potties out there for drivers to use. But again, if we're dealing with a situation where hygiene is everything and washing your hands is so critical, a porta potty might not necessarily be the thing. I have to applaud GDOT, who has really stepped up and really done a great job of cleaning their rest areas and keeping them available for this very important sector of our economy, the truck drivers. So really appreciate GDOT doing that. Detention times, that's how long a truck is held up at a facility when they're making a pickup or delivery. It's a big problem in the industry. And so we asked, were detention times any better? And you can see about just a little over a third of our respondents said they were experiencing longer detention times. Now, we attribute that again to the pandemic. If I have people who are out because they have been personally or their family members have been impacted by the pandemic, they are going to see fewer people to operate those docks. So while the supply chain may have operated more efficiently because fewer cars were on the road and trucks were able to keep faster truck speeds because of that, it didn't necessarily play out once they got to their location because there were locations where they were down staffed to be able to deal with those trucks. In terms of the outlook, again, this survey was conducted in late March, early April. We asked, what do you expect to see in terms of freight volumes over the next several months, and not necessarily a real pessimistic view. And that is another finding that we were able to check with our truck GPS data set. So we created a truck activity index for each state, measuring based on the GPS data, how much truck activity there was in a state. And while they look a little different, they pretty much, depending on which state we looked at, followed a similar pattern. Starting in early February, that was our baseline for the index. You saw an initial uptick in truck activity as the industry was responding to increased need for medical supplies and groceries and other essential services. But then as more and more businesses were shuttered because of shelter-in-place orders, you saw truck activity really start to drop off. The good news is at the back end, mid-April, we see that truck activity start to uptick in these two states, New York and Ohio. Here's Georgia, and here we take that tail out a little farther on Georgia's truck activity. So to Sam's question, we did see a drop off in truck activity, which might be partially responsible for that reduction in truck crashes or truck involved crashes. But again, a similar pattern like we saw in other states, an initial uptick in truck activity followed by a drop off. But then Georgia's coming back fairly strong and back up to where we were. Unlike a state where you have a very heavy manufacturing base, this is Michigan. It's obviously very heavy into automobile manufacturing, which was all shuttered. And so you saw a significant drop off in truck activity, and it stayed down for a while until those facilities started to reopen. And so again, just another way to measure how impactful the pandemic has been on the trucking industry. Now, each year at ATRI, we do a survey of the trucking industry at large, both motor carriers and professional drivers, to identify what their top issues of concern are. We launch this survey every August. We do it, keep it open through September, and release the results every October. So this is what it looked like in October of 2019, before any of us really knew what COVID-19 was. The number to the right of each issue is where it ranked in the previous year's survey. And so the driver shortage held on to its #1 position. The industry really struggles with finding enough qualified drivers to deliver the nation's freight. The American Trucking Association estimates that we have, before the pandemic, had a current need of about 60,000 drivers, with estimations that would top 100,000 within the next 5 to 10 years. The hours of service rules, driver compensation, driver pay, detention. I talked about how long a driver is held up at a customer facility. Both of those were new to the survey in 2019. And then truck parking was number 5. Transportation infrastructure and congestion and funding, that's one of those issues that stays on our top industry issues survey every year, as does driver shortage. And it typically ranks 7, 8, 9. You can see it actually dropped a position, but I think that was driven by the introduction of compensation and detention into this year's survey. These are how the results rank overall. This is what it looks like when you break out the respondents by commercial drivers and motor carriers. And on the driver side of the equation, it's compensation, how much they're paid, hours of service, the rules that regulate how long they can operate, followed by truck parking. Now, it's interesting, during the pandemic, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, our regulatory agency, gave exemptions to the hours of service, waivers to the hours of service rules if a truck was hauling essential goods. And that was modified several times. And in a separate survey that the American Trucking Association did of their members, they asked fleets how many were taking advantage of that hours of service waiver. And honestly, not many were. The majority said they were not because they didn't need to, and they felt that the hours of service rules were a safety guideline that was important to continue to comply with. However, FMCSA had been in the process of a rulemaking to change those hours of service rules a little bit. So we did get a formal rule change that will be put into place now for those hours of service rules. So I suspect that in our next survey in 2020, we will likely see the hours of service rules drop down as an issue for drivers and for overall. But truck parking is one of those that I don't think is going to disappear. We saw that certainly during the pandemic. Respondents to the survey said in many instances, truck parking was worse or harder to come by. So one of those topics we're going to have to continue to look at. I personally can't wait to do the 2020 survey because I think it's going to turn all of these issues up on their end. I think we'll see a whole new ranking. I suspect the economy will be much higher than the number 10 issue for folks. It will be interesting to see, given that we've had now several months of reduced traffic congestion, how that as an issue will rank in the survey. But again, some of those just don't disappear like truck parking. The driver shortage, certainly with the number of Americans who are now unemployed because their businesses have shut down and have not been able to come back, offers some opportunities for us in the industry to recruit people to be professional drivers. And I think we're going to benefit from how positive a light has been shown on the trucking industry during the pandemic, when people realized, if I'm going to get food and toilet paper and everything else I want, we've got to keep trucks rolling. And so I'm hopeful that that will play out for us in helping us ultimately reduce the driver shortage. Daniel, that's it for me. Again, I would remind folks, all of our research is on our website at truckingresearch.org. So thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today about some of what we're experiencing during the pandemic, and happy to take any questions.
Great. Well, thank you, Rebecca. And definitely agree with, your mention of your website and all the research there. It's been a great resource for me over the years. Spent many years as a transportation planner, but only started doing freight maybe about 5 years ago. And so it's been a great resource. ATRI has a lot of data in there, but also great surveys where you can really hear from the drivers and kind of start to understand what it's like in the trucking industry to really inform the work that we're doing. So again, remind everybody viewing to submit your questions in the chat box there via YouTube. And we will get that to our presenters here during the Q&A session here as we're wrapping things up. First question will be directed towards Rebecca. And the question is, what lessons learned from the COVID-19 experience are most likely to change the trucking industry going forward?
Good question. I think one of the most telling findings from our survey that I didn't put up on a slide, but we had a high percentage, upwards of 80% of fleets, smaller fleet, mid-size and smaller fleets, who said they had no disaster plan in place their operations during the pandemic. Now, I don't think any of us, regardless of what type of business we're in, really was prepared for the scope of this pandemic. But certainly a number of folks in the trucking industry were not. And I think going forward, we're going to have to take these best practices, like immediately, working with our public sector partners, both in law enforcement and transportation, to make sure things like DMVs stay open so drivers can go get their licenses, commercial driver's licenses renewed, or getting, like we did, an exemption for an extended period there. Making sure rest areas stay open so commercial drivers have a place to park. A lot of those lessons learned, we're going to, as an industry, going to have to collectively collate and really put in place going forward so that, those impacts are less or at least mitigated going forward.
I think that might be one of your research topics here going forward as a document to help guide those of us in the public sector and private sector about some needs and things that came up here during the COVID-19 experience that we're going through right now. Next question, I'll direct this one to Sam. You went through a lot of the crash data that you have available. A lot of that is now technology based, obviously, which is great. But my question would be, how can technology help address safety issues above and beyond just the records and the data that we have, maybe something more in the field, as part of the design and operations of our transportation system?
Yeah, great question. Technology used, obviously, the first things that come to mind are connected vehicle, autonomous vehicles. That has the capability of wiping out almost all, if not all, the crashes. That's always exciting to look at, always excited to see what is, the latest developments in that field. But reining that back in, what type of technology can be used immediately, and one of the, core concern areas, at least for the safety program, is pedestrians. And I brought that up through my presentation. What type of technology out there? And this is generally just a question, I mean, that we're continuing to explore. I mean, oftentimes pedestrian and bicycle data is often underreported. So being able to use technology to be able to pick up on hotspots, where are pedestrians crossing in mid-block? Where are they looking? Where are hotspots within the state that the activity is actually taking place on? So, but also, looking at technology and how it can be beneficial to those groups as well, such as I brought up the example of the passive ped detection. You're starting to see that pop up in several locations within the state and being utilized. I mean, there's a lot of positivity from a safety standpoint for you being able to detect if the pedestrian is walking towards a crosswalk or a walkway, and being able to pick up on that and to get them across the roadway safer, especially potentially during these times, of pushing the button. I mean, there's a risk factor now with that, unfortunately, with COVID-19. So there's a lot of different types of technology that I know are out there, and I'm always welcome to hear about them and see how we can integrate them into how we do business at the DOT.
Definitely more for us to all continue to learn as we go forward here. Next question up we have is also for Rebecca. Question is, how has the trucking industry been involved so far in planning for and preparing the logistics for COVID vaccine distribution?
Well, as we like to say, if you got it, a truck brought it. And we have a number of fleets who are involved directly in medical supply and would be involved in that delivery of those vaccines. And we've been involved at the highest levels with FEMA and Homeland Security and the White House in really working through all of this. I mean, we were, right at the table in the early stages, getting commercial drivers classified as essential workers, which was critical. And so, you can count on the trucking industry to see us carrying through with delivery of the vaccines as well.
Great. Next question, Rebecca, also for you. Question is, how can technology help address the trucking industry's top issues there that you're running through there at the end of your presentation?
Well, certainly technology is going to be key, I think, and one of the key tools in the toolbox to deal with the truck parking issue. Certainly, just having asphalt to park on is a help, but really, we have documented in our research the amount of time drivers waste really looking for parking, driving around looking. And so those delivery systems of real-time truck parking information are critical to drivers. So if I know as I'm approaching an exit that there's 6 spaces available or 15 spaces available, I can make that decision rather than getting off and finding there are no spaces available. That's going to help us a lot. More capacity is better, but better utilizing that capacity. Similarly, as I mentioned, what we experienced during the pandemic, where we saw no cars on the road, where it really was our infrastructure, it allowed us to operate much more efficiently. We realize that is not going to continue, but whatever we can do to mimic that in terms of more efficiently operating our system through using technology, whether it's more connected vehicles, whether it's autonomous technologies, and traffic incident management, better using technology to better manage how we deal with traffic incidents and getting information out about that is all going to help us improve that transportation infrastructure and congestion issue.
Great. I think all that's very relevant for folks that might be on this meeting with ITS Georgia, but in particular, the real-time truck parking information, because, we need those ITS engineers to design that, to be very blunt, because it is a new piece of technology. So it is something that you have to figure it out for the first time. Florida DOT, I know, has started implementing, and so has the Mid-America Freight Coalition, but it's still very new. So it's a new area that we can really start focusing on. Next question up. This one is one that I have that just, it's very specific, but it's a little bit topical because of something that happened last week. And Sam, I'll start off with you, and then Rebecca can chime in as well. But last week there was a crash in Gwinnett County in the Duluth area where a flatbed truck was stuck on railroad tracks and was hit by a train, caused obviously parts of the train to derail. Isn't a frequent crash type, but it certainly isn't the first time we've had something like this in Metro Atlanta. So Sam, any thoughts that you have on something like this that, again, not a daily occurrence, but is certainly something that is a little bit recurring that we would like to prevent and try to keep from happening if at all possible?
No, yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, the frequency, I mean, when you take a look at it, I've looked at it for the entire state in terms of rail crossing crashes. It's not a high frequency. We're talking about 1% from a total crashes. And again, that's saturated with a lot of PDO crashes. People love to get in fender benders. So, but, with the way we look at it, and I know exactly what you're talking about, when it comes across my desk, we especially with something as impactful as that, especially if there's any type of turnover with a train or the type of vehicles or how many vehicles are involved, how many fatalities involved, it would highlight it as well. So if it's I think if it's over 6 fatalities in one crash, that immediately is on the FHWA's radar, and we actually do site visits when it comes down to that. Going out there, observing the conditions, understanding how did it happen, and ultimately that's my team's goal. And to work, there's a separate division in GDOT for railroad safety. We work with that group and understanding, okay, how did it happen, and how do we ultimately prevent it from happening? So then work with our stakeholders and develop, whatever type of countermeasure we can to be able to ensure that can't happen again. And when looking at that as well, if it's something outside of our control, we would make sure to provide our analyses to different stakeholder groups so they can better understand and to go along with that.
Great. Rebecca, any thoughts that you have on that one?
Well, just, it's one of the challenges we have in the industry is, we are a interstate industry. And so we have drivers who are oftentimes for the first time in a location and may not know about the at-grade rail crossing issues for that area. We have drivers who commercial drivers who might rely on a car GPS system, back in the day, who would end up on covered bridges because the GPS told them to go that way, when clearly a covered bridge is not designed for an 18-wheeler truck. And so the more we can provide information in the cab to drivers about the routes and what are the preferred and safer routes for those commercial vehicles to take, we're all going to benefit from that.
Gotcha. Great. Rebecca, this next question also for you. What are the final changes to the ELD rulemaking that you mentioned?
Well, the ELD rulemaking has not changed. So the ELD mandate is still in place. It's the hours of service rules that have changed. And there were several features to it. Probably one that I think kept hours of service up near the top on the driver's side was the sleeper berth provision. So drivers were previously, they have to get a 10-hour block of sleep off duty before they continue on with their work. And they were previously able to do that in 8 hours and then a 2-hour block. And now FMCSA in this new rule has introduced some additional flexibility that you can take a 7 and 3-hour block, which does not count against your 14-hour on-duty window. And the benefit to that, and we did some research on this, particularly looking around Atlanta, for instance. So if I'm a professional driver who's coming into Atlanta under the old rules, if I knew it was going to be a really bad time, congestion-wise, afternoon rush hour, I might want to park outside of Atlanta, on the north side of Atlanta, or wherever, whichever direction I'm coming from, and take a break. Go ahead and get part of my sleeper berth time. Under the old rules, that was counting against your on-duty time if it was anything more than 2 hours. That extra hour was counting against. Now that 3-hour block gives just drivers a little extra flexibility, so I can make that decision to park, have that count for my sleeper berth time, I'll get some rest, and then go through in Atlanta or whatever the city may be at a more advantageous time when there's less congestion.
Gotcha. Looks like I've got one last question. We've got time here, Winter. Again, this one's for Rebecca. The question is there any study that measures the impact on pavement quality due to the increased truck percentage during the pandemic?
I'm not familiar with anyone who has studied that yet. I do think that this whole pandemic is going to keep researchers and transportation planners in business for a long time. So, and we are always looking for research suggestions. They get submitted to us a lot of times through our website or just an email sent to us, and then we take it to our research advisory committee. So certainly if there are topics that folks think the trucking industry should be investigating more, let us know.
Okay. Well, great. Well, again, a big thank you to Rebecca Brewster with ATRI and to Sam Harris with GDOT. Really great presentations, great Q&A. And again, thank you for your presentations, and thank you for everybody attending. And I will hand things back to Winter.
Yes, thank you, Daniel and Rebecca and Sam, for such a great discussion and very interesting information. Also, again, thank you, Tommy and Control Technologies, for sponsoring this meeting. And thank you for, he gave me a thumbs up, so there's that. And thank you for your time to come and talk to us, Tommy. As a reminder, just quickly for some people who may have gotten on a little bit later, register and virtually tune in to our next meeting in July. Look for that. Again, we're going to be doing that, co-hosting that with GPA. It will be a panel of our locals about maintaining signal and ITS infrastructure. So we're working on finalizing those details, and we'll have that out to you. Additionally, the annual meeting is scheduled for September 27th to the 29th at the lovely Westin on Jekyll Island. We will continue to keep all of you updated as we know more about the logistics in our ever-changing daily new reality. Also, keep in mind that we are still accepting donations to help put necessary technology into the hands of children in our local community. Any donations we receive will go directly to the laptop need that we have found here locally. Please keep an eye out for our ITS Georgia emails and social media announcements to stay informed. If you have any questions, do not hesitate to contact me directly or go to the ITS Georgia website, clicking on the Contact Us tab. Thank you all again for joining us today. And one more important note, if you have any need during this time, or you know someone who needs assistance during this situation, please reach out to us, as we want to make sure we are available to help our members and community in any way possible. Please continue to stay healthy, and we look forward to seeing you all virtually again next month. Thank you.